All right, welcome to another episode of the Scripting Them podcast. I'm Fernando, your host, as usual. And in today's episode, I want to cover a topic that I actually heard while listening to another podcast, the Develop Yourself podcast by Brian Jenny. I don't know if I'm butchering his name or not, but if you haven't heard of the Develop Yourself podcast, I would highly recommend that you check it out. It's very good. He covers a lot of interesting topics about the IT industry, sort of like what I try to do here, but from his own angle and his own background experience. So it's definitely a very interesting take. And he did cover this same topic, which is working for a startup versus working for a bigger company. Usually, like he puts it like a Fortune 100 companies. I don't have that type of experience, but I do have experience working for early startups, advanced or more older startups, and also bigger companies and consulting companies such as like size of 40,000 employees and also around 500,000 employees. So I do have my own point of view on this subject, and I just wanted to cover it and share with you kind of my insights regarding the idea of whether one of these environments is better or worse for you. So let's get started with the show. All right, let's start with the startups. We can kind of roughly classify startups into categories. Very early startups, like 1-2 years or even less, with when you have like 5 people when you join. Maybe you join when the company is being formed, or you join very early on the lifespan of the company, and they're like still being the product, 5-6 employees. And you just join there. And then there are these other startups like that are still in startup mode, but have been around for like 5-6, maybe 8 years. Some might not consider them startups at that stage. Some will. They are relatively small company-wide, but like 30, maybe 40 employees, several projects, more stable company. So we're going to talk about differences between those two, and then we'll move on to bigger companies. So when it comes to starting to work on a very early stage startup, so there are a few things to consider. You're entering a place that is usually complete chaos, but in a good way, meaning that they are working towards one single goal, which is finishing a product, a service, or with a finished product, trying to get or grow their customer base. That's not the chaotic part. The chaotic part is that they're scrapping and trying to do everything they can to get to that point, to break even essentially. Usually what happens is they will be VC funded. So that means people from outside the company will give them money, and they are spending that money slowly, while at the same time earning money or not yet from customers. The idea is for them to break even in the sense of making more money that they are spending every month. Once they reach that point, then everything's a little bit more relaxed. But until that point, and I've shown startups where they've been around for like 2 or 3, even 4 years, and they haven't really reached that point yet. So it's not really that weird to be on the initial stage. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? But there is a little bit more stress at that stage because obviously the entire team is responsible to get the product to the point where it can start making money. And by that I mean every single developer, which usually what happens is most of the team are developers, and they are designers, they are marketers, they are salespeople. What happens is that when you're showing at very early stage startups, you end up wearing a lot of hats, sometimes even at the same time. That can be a good thing because you get to learn get to experience the many aspects of building a product, from focusing on different things, focusing on marketing first, and then focusing on development, focusing on on sales, focusing on studying the market, studying competition, doing a lot of things that as a developer in a bigger company you wouldn't need to worry about, because there is someone else focused on that part, and you just worry about the code. That said, I mean, it's not all bad. I mean, it's not all chaos. It's not all a horrible experience. You are usually expected to work more than you would in a bigger company. The working hours, I don't want to say that this happens for every single early stage startup, but usually the working hours are kind of blending with your personal life. And if you don't mind about that, if you don't, if that's not a problem because you're committed with the product and you're committed with the company and you want to make it part of your life, then that's fine for you. That's where also one of the pros, I would say, for startups comes into place, which is there are definitely bigger risks, but with the bigger risks come greater rewards. What I'm trying to say here is that yes, you will be working extra hours because there's not enough people to cover everything. Yes, there is more uncertainty when it comes to whether you'll have the job in the next 6 months or the next year. But because you joined the company so early, if it goes well, if the team actually manages to pull it off and get the product up and running and get the customers and it blows up, then you probably got some equity. You're probably, since you're there from the beginning, once the team starts growing, then you probably grow in responsibility as well, right? I'm not saying that because you're employee number 5, you'll automatically become the CTO, but when the company grows, you'll probably become the team lead for whatever you were focusing on, for example. Or when the company grows enough, you'll probably be able to execute that equity that you were given. Now, when it comes to cons of working for such a early stage company, I think I mentioned already a few, like the craziness, the chaotic experience, the extra hours, definitely something that you will have to experience. The jumping around responsibilities. It can be something good because you're learning a lot, but it can also be something bad or feel like a bad experience if you don't join expecting that, or if you just don't care for it. Working for an early stage startup is not for everyone. And if it's not for you, that doesn't really say anything about you. It's just that you just don't like working that way. That's all. But at this stage, in this type of company, jumping around responsibility, jumping around roles is definitely something that you will experience. So it can also be a con. It can also be a problem. The unstable environment is also something that can happen. And it can be from two different places, at least the way I see it. It can be unstable in the sense of the company's still losing money after several years, and and you don't know if it's going to eventually break even, if it's eventually going to start generating revenue. So that means that VCs or any type of support the company has might eventually disappear. That is a reality that doesn't really happen with bigger companies. And the other type of instability can happen from within the team. You're joining a very small team that is usually composed of very high skilled people, right? Usually when startups are just getting started, they will not hire inexperienced people because they have to optimize whatever little resources they have. So chances are, if you're joining other people as well, they are very skilled at one particular thing, and they also are very good at doing many things. Now, with that said, we know developers have the tendency to have big egos. Now, in smaller teams, you usually have like one loud voice that is leading the entire quote-unquote company culture. which right now at this stage is just the way that person works. If you agree with that person in terms of working habits, developing best practices and so on, then you're definitely good. You're gonna fit in, and then you're gonna be comfortable working there. But if you immediately clash with them and the way they see these practices, then chances are you're just not gonna fit in the entire company, because it's such a small ecosystem that the loudest person here is just dictating the entire thing. It's just dictating the entire company culture, again, quote unquote, because this is not really a company culture. It's just that person's culture that is permeating everywhere because of the small size of the team. And one particular problem that I see working with, especially with early stage startups, is equity. I mention it as a pro as well, if the company blows up, but that's not always the case, right? I mean, that's the unicorn that people talk about. But the normal tendency of startups is once they break even, once they make it work, and they realize they have a product, they see market fit, they are able to realize who the customers are and start getting paid for their product, they keep growing slowly. Equity at this stage, to me, it means nothing, to be honest. It's a way for small startups to sweeten the pot when they give you an offer. They will offer you the standard salary, and then on top of it, they will add 100, maybe 200K on equity, which means nothing, to be honest, because that equity usually comes with a few conditions. Like you can start vetting that equity after the first year, which means you have to at least stay 1 year in the company. And then what I've usually seen is that once you go past that 1 year cliff, the equity is given to you prorated in like 4 or 5 years period, which means that by the end of that period, you'll be able to vet the entire amount of money that you were promised in stocks. Now, obviously, don't take my word for it. Just make sure you research the topic better than just listening to me, because I'm not an expert here. But to the best of my understanding is that by the end of that 5 year period, let's just say 5 years, the company is expecting to grow 2, 3, 4-fold, essentially. By then, the 200K that you were given in equity is worth like 800, which, if you think about it, it's a nice investment. But what a lot of people don't understand is that by that time, you still cannot cash in that money. You can't really sell those stocks because you're not given stocks. You're given something else. And the only two places where you can actually use that equity is whether when the company gets bought. At that time, I think that you have a place to like sell part of all your equity, or when the company goes through an IPO process. Now, you have to think about that. You have to understand the motivations of the owners of the company, CEO, the CTO. Are they doing this so that they can eventually be bought up by another company? If that's the case, then they're probably betting on it is a good thing, betting on that equity. But if they are actually compromised and they love the product and they just want to make it grow as far as possible, then chances are, even if offers come, they will ignore them. So that means one of your betting options, one of your moments for you to actually get some revenue out of that promise, out of that equity, it's just gone. Now you just have to wait until the company is big enough to go through an IPO process. That means the company is making so much money that it has to make its earnings public. Again, don't take my word for it. Research, but that it's definitely going to take a long time. So when you're deciding to join an early stage startup and you're looking at the offer they give you, my personal advice is ignore whatever equity they're offering and just make sure that the rest of the offer makes sense to you. Unless, of course, you're willing to make that bet, that long-term bet. But given how dynamic our industry is, in the sense of people being able to jump from one company to the other, or actually doing it very often, then chances are you're going to leave that company way sooner than you can actually use that equity for anything. So you just agreed on joining the startup for a promise of maybe 800K, which is really something non-tangible. It's something that you're not really going to get anytime soon. So that's, to me, one of the biggest cons when it comes to working at an early stage startup. In my case, once I got to experience that, once I got to go through that process of getting excited and then realizing that it was just something that untangible and something I would never get. Whenever I got a new offer from another startup, I would just say, you know what? I don't want equity. I just want to make sure that whatever extra you can give me on top of your base offer makes the difference for me, instead of that equity, which I know I'm not going to get anytime soon. And that way I'm being honest with myself, and also I'm being honest with the company. That's what I would recommend. Again, my advice, you do you. Now, these early stage startups, right? I mean, once they spend some time, once they break even, once they start growing and they have a well-defined team, say between 20 and 40 people, that makes them probably still a startup. They might still require some extra funding. They might still have very few processes and the need to keep moving fast. But it's a more stable company. You join a company that has some internal processes. There's probably at least one person looking out for HR, looking out for people. There is probably a few designers if the company has the need for them. So probably someone else is doing marketing or sales. You don't have to do them as a developer. So there are more chances for you to join and work on code and worry about code. Now, the good thing about that is that you need to worry about less things. You know that by then there is a very well-defined company culture. Now, these type of companies, they are not big enough to be considered corporate, but they're small enough at the same time to have a very tight relationship inside, right? So in some situations, they might see themselves, or they might function, quote unquote, as a family. Now, if that is their sales pitch, if that's how they promote themselves, if that's how they want you to want to work for them, then I would say just run away. Companies are never a family, even though they're just 20 or 100 people. Companies are a place to work. They have their own responsibilities, and they will never fully work as a family. There might be amazing relationships inside. There might be friendships even inside, but that doesn't mean that they are actually a family. So that's just a warning coming from me, from my own experience as well. So keep in mind those little details. If the company is big enough to have a well-established team, then you will have a more stable experience working for them. But you'll still be able to jump around some roles, like from dev to PM, for example. That's a very common thing. If you have enough experience, then you might be assigned as a team lead, for example. In these small companies, usually the team lead is acting like a project manager and technical lead as well at the same time. So that's something, for example, that I've experienced myself. It's not ideal for some people because some developers like to focus on the technical side of leadership and not so much on project management, which involves a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of time tracking and so on, that it doesn't really require any technical knowledge from the dev point of view. And it also involves, in some situations, like having conversations with client or being client facing, which is, again, something that if you have the soft skills to do it, that is fantastic. Or if you don't, then it's a fantastic way to develop those soft skills. And if you don't care for it, if you don't really care to deal with client problems or client requests, then probably it's something that you will not enjoy. So I just want to say that these type of companies are great to show you what you can achieve. You will, if you stay a few years there, you will probably be able to grow professionally and reach some sort of cap within the company. And that's one of the problems with this type of company. They will let you grow, but the career path is very limited, or at least the immediate career path. If these companies keep growing, then probably there will be more space for you. But usually what happens is that you have the CEO, the CTO, which is also the engineering manager, which is also the one setting all the standards. And you're just going from like junior dev to senior dev to tech lead. And those are like usually the limited growing path. Unless you want to pivot into something else, you're stuck there. And if that's all you want, that's fantastic. But and that leads me to the next step is, if you join bigger companies, then your professional career path is way longer and it allows you to do a lot more things. So one thing I will say about this before I leave is that working for startups, whether they are early stage startups or more mature ones, your name, you yourselves are going to have a bigger impact on the company. Now, that's also something that might be interesting to you. Whatever you do is going to impact the product and the company, whether you do things right and move the product forward, or you just screw up and then delay a release, or just break a feature that directly impact the two paying customers. So keep that in mind. This is, again, going back to the topic of higher risks, higher rewards. You're one of the few people in the company, so everyone knows your name, everyone knows who you are, and everyone knows what you're great at and your potential. That's, again, a big bet to place in the company. If it grows, chances are you will grow with it, but you have to wait and be patient. Now, if you join a bigger company, we're talking about 10,000, 40,000, 500,000 employees. Companies that are around the world, companies that will force you, essentially will make you work with people around the world in remote situations. Chances are you will not always be dealing with your colleagues just sitting next to you. In those situations, the entire experience is going to be different. Yes, you will not have the impact on the company that you had working for startups, but that can also be a good thing, right? Because you'll have less responsibilities and you'll have less impact on the company if for some reason you screw up. And let's face it, as developers, we always, throughout our career, we're definitely going to screw up at some point. We're going to run a delete statement on a SQL query, on a SQL database without the where statement. We've all done that. We will eventually deploy bugs into production because we rushed the tests. That is part of our profession. Sadly, it happens to everyone. If it happens on an environment where doing a rollback is impossible and you just have to edit the code in production to make sure that your 3 paying customers don't see it, or if you do it in an environment where you just click and roll back and then apologize and then move on, it's up to you. Now, when you join a bigger company, when you join an international company, the experience is just going to be completely different. We now have very well-defined departments that will take care of your onboarding, that will give you everything you need to get started. There will be the financial department that will give you everything you need to get paid, will request everything, all the details from you. There is going to be a very well-established organization for the technical side as well. If you're joining a technical company with the engineers manager, technical directors, team leads, and wherever in that hierarchy you join. If you join in as a developer, you will see that you have a very high ladder to climb to get to the top. If that is something that you care about. Personally, when I join a company or a new role, I'm usually thinking, okay, this is what I have to do now, and what's my next step? Where do I want to go from here, from this role on? And I usually make sure that I have somewhere else to go in terms of growth, in professional growth within the company. If I have a next step that I'm comfortable, because I know I have to establish myself where I'm right now, and then start working on the next, trying to get that to that next role. So to me, that's very important. To me, making sure that I don't have a visible cap to my professional progression is very important, because I want to keep growing, right? As part of joining this bigger company, there is an intrinsic feeling of stability, right? You're joining a place where the company is not going to close anytime soon. They already millions of dollars a year, so you're comfortable. Now, obviously, you can always be fired if you don't do your job right. So stability is kind of an illusion in the sense of you being 100% sure that you will have this job forever. That's not going to happen. That's never how you should feel. You should always strive to do your best to make sure, to ensure that you keep having that job. That's for sure. But at least you know that if something happens to your job, it's going to be because of you and not because of some sort of external influence that affected the company to the point where it had to close. That's not going to happen here. Now, one of the other great things about joining big companies, especially if you join at a manager level, in some situations also as developers with high seniority, you get bonuses. And this is not the same as equity, which we talked about for the startups. This is actual money that you get a year. Obviously the bonus is going to change, is going to vary depending on your placement within the hierarchy of the company. The higher you are, the bigger it's going to be. But at least it's there. It's something that if you don't have it right now, if you keep growing, you will have it. And they usually, the higher you go, they're usually quite interesting and quite useful. Completely different from the equity that we discussed. And in some companies, they actually also allow you to buy stocks whenever, if the company went through already an IPO, which all these big companies usually have already. So we get two different monetary incentives other than obviously the actual salary, which are the bonuses and your ability to get stocks from the company, which in this case you can buy, the company grows, and then you can sell and get that money back. So it's not the same as we talked about before. This is actually useful. Now, obviously, working for bigger companies is not perfect. I mean, there is no perfect place to work. There's always good things and bad things, and you just have to make sure which ones are important to you the most. Now, in terms of cons for working for these type of big companies, one thing that always bothers me is that there's a way more bureaucracy. So if you make the switch, it's also something that really hits you in the face. If you go from working at a small startup and join a big ass enterprise, you will see that there are way more processes. Something that maybe you did in 10 minutes, accessing some systems or just directly changing something in a database or something like that in the startup version. When you join this company, you will see that you have to start asking for permission, requesting access, justifying why you need access for those things. And I mean, it's really a pain, but if you think about it, the stakes are so high when you want to do something outside of your usual realm of activity that it's justified, right? In some situations, that bureaucracy is taken to extreme levels, but that's just how the company works. But at least some portion of that bureaucracy is required by bigger companies. You have people that usually will take care of the extra things that you need instead of doing them yourselves. So let's say you want to deploy something, and back then when you were working at the startup, you were just configuring Docker, you were all changing the Docker files yourself, and then even logging into the GCP console and making the changes yourself. Now you have to raise a ticket, ask for the DevOps team or the CloudOps team to make those changes, and they have to talk to the SecOps team to make sure that from the security point of view, there is nothing wrong and it's approved. And then if they do approve it, they will make the change. Something that maybe in your situation took you 10 minutes, now it might take 2 weeks. Is it a pain? Yes. Is it required? Absolutely yes as well. Definitely something that needs to happen, and it's not always nice. It's definitely also contributes to an X factor, which is you move a lot slower. It is not ideal, but you definitely move slower than moving inside a startup. That translates to not being able to push or make changes as fast as possible. But it also means that when you do actually push to production, chances of breaking something or your chances of pushing something that is not what needed to be there are way lower. So it's a balance, right? I mean, you now have security considerations to look at. You have performance considerations. You have probably UX and design considerations. And all of those departments will look at whatever you're working on. They'll have their own input, and then you'll have to make sure that you comply with everything. Once you do, the thing goes out. Is it slower? Yes, but the end result is expected at least to be better, right? Processes don't ensure quality, but they at least help get there. When it came to I just keep going back to the startup example. If you want to develop a new feature, especially with the early stage startup with 5 developers, chances are you don't have security teams, you don't have performance or testers, you don't have designers or UX engineers. All you have is you doing everything. While you can have some notion of all these practices, the chances of you being an expert in all of them is just very close to zero. So you might have great code, but it might not be very nice looking, or just it won't have the best user experience. Or you might be pushing some sort of very niche or complicated security vulnerability. You don't know. So that's why when you come to like the bigger companies, you have all these extra steps. They are definitely required. They're actually useful. Just don't try to fight them. Embrace them and accept that you will move slower, but for a very good reason. Now, from the working experience, right? That feeling of family that I talked about, that sense of having close relationship with everyone in the company. When you join a company with 10,000 people, 40,000, 500,000, you're not going to get to know everyone. You might get to know your teammates, especially if they are located close to you. But if you're working with someone in a completely different time zone, chances are you'll interact very little with each other in some meetings through email or some collaboration, but that's going to be very limited. So it can feel lonely. It can feel like you're isolated or siloed from the entire company. That's a very valid feeling, and it has to be something that if you do feel that way, you have to bring it up to your manager to make sure that they do something about it, because chances are you're not the only one feeling that way. And if you don't feel part of the company, at least part of your department, your team, then chances are you're gonna want to move on to somewhere else. So if you feel that way, that is something that you should bring up to your direct manager and probably ask them for some advice. Tell them that this is not a great way to work and see how they respond. But again, and that's a feeling that tends to go away if you keep growing within the company. If you move higher up that professional ladder, chances are you're going to start making more connections. And that's where kind of the last con, this is quote unquote con for bigger companies, that it requires you to play within the politics of the company. Each company will have their own culture. The bigger the company, the more complex that culture is going to be, and the more internal politics are going to be playing in that culture. People will have their own agendas. Managers will have their own, ways of working, and different departments, even though they're all tech, might also have different goals, different interests, and they might collide with each other. Not every single company is like that, but you will face internal politics whether you like them or not. You just have to, if you want to keep growing, again, within that professional ladder, you have to learn how to play the game. I don't like it. Many developers don't like it, but it's a necessary evil. Sadly, that's how all companies are organized. And this is not a bad thing per se. I'm saying politics as if that was an evil thing. Just don't take it that way. What I'm saying is there are interaction and internal dynamics that you have to understand, and you have to know how to request certain things, who you can ask for favors, who can help you achieve things, or whenever you have to work outside the predefined processes because you have to move a little faster, you need to know who you can ask for those favors. This is not about breaking rules. This is just about learning learning to play the game. It can feel stressful. It can feel overwhelming at times, and it is. You just have to ease into it. That's all. Eventually, that translates to you having to get your name around. Getting people to know who you are in these companies is crucial for you to keep moving ahead. And that's simply because there are so many people, and especially if you start as a junior developer and move up from there, the competition to keep growing and to eventually take roles of high responsibility is huge. And while these companies have processes for feedback, for promotions, and so on, in the end, we're just dealing with people dealing with people. And when it comes to someone having the power to decide who gets a promotion, if that person with the power knows one of them and they like that person, and the other one may have a better resume, better work experience, but they just don't know who they are, chances are the one that is known by that person in power is going to get that promotion. Is it fair? I don't think it is, but we're not dealing with machines here, and that might also be a good thing. So again, this is the corporate politics. This is the game that has to be played. This is not something that you should worry about if you just join a company as a developer, but it's something that you just have to keep an eye up and see who is making favors for who's asking who to break some of the rules. When you're asked for a favor, or even without being asked for, but making sure that, if there is an opportunity, you present yourself as help to those people. It is a way to get your name around and eventually being asked to join other teams, or eventually being given a promotion on top of other people looking for the same place. I'm not saying 100% of the companies work that way, but in my experience, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen many companies, and the smaller the company is, the less politics it has, but the bigger the number of relationships and the weight that internal politics has on your progression is huge. So if you're looking at, or you just joined a big company and you haven't really figured that out, yes, just start paying attention. Start looking at who asked for what, who you can help, who your manager is asking for help when they need it, and try to make yourself available. The more people that know your name within the company, more chances you'll have to get that promotion when you look for it. And that's kind of it, essentially, when it comes to working at a startup versus working at a big company. The startup is going to let you move faster. It's going to give you a lot more flexibility when it comes to technology. When it comes to even your role is going to change a lot. But there's also more uncertainty when it comes to what you have to do, or even if you're going to have a job in the next year, in the next 2 years. Bigger company, the bigger the company is, more stable it becomes, but it also becomes a little bit slower. The technical side, while still important, starts playing a smaller portion of the role in getting you a promotion, and your soft skills and your ability to play that internal game becomes way more important. So you have to understand the differences. There's also the professional ladder that you have within each of these companies, each of these types of companies. If you want something that is fast-paced, using the latest tech, and you thrive within that uncertainty, if you thrive within that feeling that you have to give everything for the company, everything for the shop, then probably startup is a good place for you. If you feel like you're looking for stability, if you're looking for a place to grow over the years, if you feel like you're more comfortable working in bigger teams with the support of more people that are specialized in areas where you don't just have the time to work on, then probably the startup place is not for you. You'll feel more comfortable on a company on a big company. Is there one better than the other? I don't think the answer is there is no answer to that question. Everyone has a different way of seeing their work, and you feel comfortable with different situations. My advice, if there needs to be an advice here, is try both if you can. Join a startup, see how that feels for you. Join a bigger company if you can, see how that feels for you, and then make the choice whether you want to stay within the bigger company and keep growing there, or you just miss the fast-paced environment of a early stage startup. But make sure that you try both if you can, and make the choice that way. Because honestly, while I can tell you how I felt in both situations, I can't really recommend anything specifically for you because I don't know who you are. That's all. And that's it. Now the episode's over. Thank you for listening. And again, big shout out to Brian Shenny for bringing this topic on his own podcast, Develop Yourself. If you haven't, check it out. It's a great listen. And thank you for listening to Scripting Them podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed my view on the topic, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye. And that was it for this episode of the Scripting Them podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you can find me online on Twitter at TheDeepMan123, and you can also find the podcast YouTube channel just searching for the Scripting Them on YouTube. Thank you again, and catch you on the next one.